Here on the Creative Thinker Podcast, we discuss all theories, philosophy, and thought behind the creative process. And we hope that you find some inspiration along the way. To the creative thinkers all across the globe, to my left is Michael Vasquez. Welcome back.
Hello, world. It is nice to be back. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, how are you today?
I am doing swell today. It is nice and cool out here. Not crazy hot yet down here in Texas, so enjoying the cooler weather.
Texas, USA. That's where it's at, baby. All right. Today's topic is, you guessed it, because it's the title of the episode. If I had to guess, you can just smack your coffee cup into your microphone like that.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to talk about writer's block today. When you're reaching that point in your fiction or your art piece, because it happens to painters and other artistic people, not just writers.
To all artists.
The block of writer experienced in all art forms. So we're talking today about what happens and how to get past it. So I think we've all been there in our art when we reach a point of no return and no progress, when suddenly we are out of ideas to continue with, we're out of things to change, of what is already on the page or on the canvas, and we're just stuck. And then the anxiety builds and we're stuck more and more. And then we try to forget about it, if you're anything like me. So, writer's block. Have you experienced that, Michael?
Never. This is a new experience for me.
Man,
yes.
You're good.
Yes, of course, I've experienced writer's block. I've been writing like fan fiction since I was about 12. Whenever I started playing Halo and getting on Bungie.net, I joined. Real big throwback. I would get on the forums and try and get into the RPG groups or the RPG forum where you created a story with other people, and it would kind of like go in cycles in smaller groups that we had. So it wouldn't just be one person telling a story, but you had anxiety whenever it would come back and you're like, okay, the three other guys have gone and it is my turn next to come up with something in the world. So yeah, I've experienced that. That was, just a little bit of writing history for me. And then I was like, well, let me create my own story. And yeah, as a young 8th grade boy, I experienced writer's block and continued to still experience writer's block from here, there, particularly when writing, get a little bit more flexibility with D&D to kind of finagle some stuff, but mainly with writing.
Did you know that Christopher Paolini, the writer of Eragon, had I don't know if it was officially sanctioned forum at one point that I was an often contributor on as well when I was a young boy. So
the more you know.
It wasn't fanfic necessarily. It was like, I don't know. It was like people just threw on random stories and stuff. And it was like, if you can contribute 100 words in a post, then it was the next person's turn to go. But it wasn't like about Eragon, so nowhere near as cool as like Bungie.
Yeah.
But I was homeschooled, so it's not my fault. So we're going to talk about how to stop writer's block. Now, what is the worst advice, if you've received any, on how to stop writer's block? What was the worst?
The worst advice to stop writer's block would probably be like, this isn't your thing then. I was like, wow. Okay.
That's pretty rough.
Thanks for the encouragement, brother.
Wow.
Yeah, I would say that's the worst. What about you?
Yeah, well, I've gotten Well, you should do drugs while you write. I've heard that one. I've also heard that you should just try harder. So that's another good one I've heard. Yeah. Those were the two probably worst. It's like do drugs and try harder.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be what most people follow. So
yeah, that was actually something I was going to talk about. Not that I do that, but I guess, some people view coffee and alcohol as a form of drug. So, there's some truth to it, maybe. Each person is different. Each state is different. Each country is different, what they allow and don't allow. So it could help.
We'll put a pin in that because that sounds like some good, at least like altering your current state suggestions, which is something that we're going to get to a little bit later on. So I like where your head's at.
Cool.
But before we get there, this topic I did my research on.
Oh, snap.
Try to hold back your judgment. No. So I did my research on this for the first time ever, becoming a big kid. And what I didn't notice on any of the lists, first of all, as a first time researcher in a while, if it's not a list with numbers, I am not going to read it.
You got to know when the end is.
Yeah. And I got to know, like, okay, if I already read everything I want to know about a certain thing, then I want to just scroll to the next number.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, go for a walk. Try walking. Okay, well, I've read that like 10 times. So let me go to point number 2. Anyway, so end aside. The things that I did not see on my sweet little numbered lists was...
they were all the bullet points that you're about to start listing.
Yeah. No one said rest, not even once.
Really?
Not even once on the numbered lists I found. I may have been on a weird part of the internet, but...
I am shocked.
There was nobody suggesting rest. Rest, my goodness. Take a break. Take a nap. Go for a walk. Give yourself a break from the subject matter. Quit putting pressure on yourself. I don't care if you have a deadline and it's in the next 15 minutes. If you can't create in that moment, give yourself a 5-minute break and then come back and let the last 10 minutes be your mad dash for the finish. Like, there's so much time to put pressure on ourselves, and there's so many outside influencers, like actual influencers, YouTube, Instagram, social media, beating down on us. Everybody's saying deliver content, and it's all crap, first of all. But second of all, when I'm not on a rant, I just want to say, like, it's important to rest, and resting should be like a quarter of your day every day.
Yeah.
And you should do it intentionally. So like when I lay down at the end of the day, I know I'm going to be asleep within an hour. I don't know how many people can say that, but I lay down and I know I'm going to be asleep because I am intentional about sleep. And I'm intentional about rest. If I'm going to take a break, then I'm going to take a break aggressively. I'm going to go play video games. I'm going to do, I'm going to have my feet up. Yeah. I'm not doing anything. If I'm resting, my mind is blank and I'm doing nothing useful intentionally.
I think that is a good piece of advice that you learn once you start getting a little bit older, because you need to rest to like function, right? So I've been working warehouse jobs for the last 10 years. So knowing the importance of rest to be able to do my job, and then to be able to intentionally rest, turn my brain off to be creative, so important. And it all starts with sleep. If you don't get whatever your amount of sleep is, needs to be more than 6 hours, probably anywhere between like 7 to 9 hours. If you can get that good solid sleep, good REM cycles to start your day, then you're going to be exponentially more creative.
Yeah, I think as athletes, both former athletes, we both knew that physical labor or physical work needs rest. Your body needs time to recuperate, especially in an injury, right?
Yep.
Like rest has an important role as an athlete, but I think where it gets turned off is people say, well, writing or art is not a physical thing.
Right.
There is very much chemical processes going on in your brain.
Yeah.
And how I said that is completely just grammatically terrible. There are chemical processes happening in your brain that cause you to get tired. You're thinking very hard. You're using up that sugar, that salt, all the things that your brain loves, and you are wearing yourself out, and you still need rest.
Yes.
And it may even be like you need to go do something physical, like a walk. Yeah. And
I know, like, even days that I get good sleep and we're going to play D&D and I have to work the next day, I typically come home, take a little power nap so I can rest, so I can be like creatively on point and ready for making it the best experience for you guys as I can. So, you know, rest. That's number one item. We didn't make our own list.
Make our own number
list. One for breaking.
Rest isn't on it.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's not. The food is like having a good diet is on there, but not. I mean, and going for a walk, but not sleeping.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Because it's just like, I mean, just like everything else on the internet right now. It's try harder, try harder, try harder. You'll get there eventually, because look at the outlet you have. You can put this out to billions of people. It's like, well, billions of people are not going to see it. The most successful program in the United States ever on the radio had 65 million listeners in a week. Not on the same day, in a week. Mm-hmm. And it was every day. And that's crazy. That's not, in terms of the world, that's not a lot of people.
Yeah.
So give yourself some rest. Don't give yourself the weight of the entire internet when you only have access to your 1,000 followers. And of them, the people that are going to see it's probably about 50. So
what would your second, if you're making a list, your number one, what's your
You're
number
saying
two?
Stop ranting, aren't you? Okay.
No, I'm just curious. What is up there with rest to you to fight writer's block? My turn to ask the questions.
Okay. I got to stop having you back if you're going to ask questions.
It's been nice knowing everyone.
Just kidding. All right. So personify your audience is my number two.
And what do you mean by personify your audience?
So I'm going to give an example that I thought made Stephen King seem a little bit douchey. No offense to the king. Terrible sentence. We'll just redact that from the final episode. Right. So he says in his book on writing that every afternoon he responds to fan letters. And I thought, whoa, what an ego on this guy. He's going to sit there and listen to all these great things people are sending him, probably been filtered by his editor to get rid of all the weirdos, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, he's just going to be listening to all this great stuff, patting himself on the back and responding. And it struck me recently that he's maybe just as much and more so really the value he gets out of that is that he knows that little Susie from Milwaukee is reading his work, and the next time he hits a stumbling block and he can't put another word on the page, he's like, I can't let little Susie down. I've got to power through this. I've got to make something good because I know she's out there and I want her to love this as much as she did the last one. Mm-hmm. And I know because we've talked about this before as we've coined the phrase, thin mayonnaise? Is that what it was?
Yeah. Spreading the thin mayonnaise.
Spreading the thin mayonnaise, which just for clarification, just means as you're spreading mayonnaise across a piece of bread, if you don't have enough, it's going to run out before you reach the other end. And so if you haven't done your pre-work and you don't have enough content, eventually you're going to reach a point where you run out. And that's what we were referring to as thin mayonnaise. So the thin mayonnaise moments, when Stephen King has a thin mayonnaise moment, he's going to think about little Susie because it's easier. It's easier to create things for other people.
Yeah.
And I think we were talking about this earlier too, like with D&D, We've both run campaigns at different points. Yours much more in depth and much longer than mine, but we've run them, and I have a much easier time getting myself to generate content for you guys to enjoy than I do in writing my books. Like if I put as much time in finishing off the 2 books that I've written, maybe one of them would be published by now, as I did into a D&D campaign. Yeah. But I had more fun with a D&D campaign. So I was like, I'm not mad about it, but it's easier to create for other people. Your thoughts, Michael Vasquez?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, because as we were kind of talking about the topic off podcast, we had both...
Not that we do that. That's metagaming. We would never do that.
We were both talking about our unfinished projects and projects that we could have put more time into it, right? So like I said, I've written fan fiction, right? It helps me to write, to get in a good creative process for the rest of my endeavors. But if I would have put as much time into those, I could have, like you said, like put out some short stories somewhere, or maybe written a book, because the amount of hundreds, if not thousands of hours I've put over the course of 4 years of D&D campaign, then I would have something a lot more, I don't want to say sustainable or something more of substance. But because I was doing this for y'all, I was enjoying it a lot more, because I'm like, ooh, I think they'll like this. I think they'll like that. Kind of circles back around to personifying your audience. Didn't realize that's what I was doing to help fight the writer's block, was to be like, okay, what would be fun for you? What would be fun for my wife? What would be fun for your wife? So like trying to figure out what's going to be fun for everybody helped me break that. And I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, that's all right. I'm going to jump in. Save the day. I don't know. I'm losing it. Not enough or too much coffee. So there's a point in D&D when you've run out of scripted content. Mm-hmm. You have people in front of you that you know very well, because you're not going to get a stranger to come to your house to play D&D.
Most likely.
And if they agree to that, maybe disinvite them. No. So anyway, you're going to know them very well. And then suddenly you're going to have to create something. And the point of personifying is that you know the person well enough, like you said, that you're going to know their likes and dislikes. Mm-hmm. So like if there's some sort of competition or some sort of weird but funny character or some sort of like honor bound quest, right? I'm going to gravitate towards that, because I think that that's fun as a player for sure. Mm-hmm. And you know that. And so as soon as you reach that point of nothing, then you're like, okay, well, I could just throw out a competition. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could do axe throwing. We mentioned that the other day, that's like enshrined in the Hall of Fame of our D&D campaign. Yeah. And you just have somebody come up with a axe throwing board, and suddenly we've got 30 minutes of in-game.
If I need y'all to fight somebody, I just have them to vaguely offend your wife's character, and we got a fight going.
She suffers no fools. So yeah, there's always a point when if you personify your audience, then you know what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. And the series that do that really well, like Harry Potter, I feel like the writer of those books, talked about how she knows that at this point people are coming back to the series to see what's going on with Ron, Hermione, and Harry. Mm-hmm. And it's not so much what goes on with any of the other characters at the school. Mm-hmm. So it's like, in the 4th book, she adds all these characters, and you can tell she's having a good time as a writer. Yeah, you can. And then 5th and 6th, you're like, wow, this really focuses in again. Mm-hmm. And I feel like she just took what people wanted from the series and then built those next books around it. Mm-hmm. Which some people tend to view as crowdsourcing, is basically taking away my creative outlet. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the other day, I've been watching the Beatles documentary on Disney Plus, and they talk about to each other as they're griping at each other. They say, well, you're not letting me have as much say on the songs as I would like. And it's like, well, they're the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's the only music. Don't want to offend anybody. That's the only music most people listen to from that era.
Mm-hmm.
Especially people with record players from Walmart and Target, right?
Yeah.
So they listen to the Beatles. Everybody knows the Beatles. And still, out of those 4 people, that's not very many people to fight over control, but they're still like, I don't get to create what I want to create. Yeah. I thought that's wild for one thing. But my takeaway from that is that, or what I would like to impart on people, to be more correct, is that other people make your art better.
Mm-hmm.
Personifying them makes your art better because you are forcing yourself to take someone else's point of view into account and see your work from another angle. It's sort of like taking your 2-dimensional art and making it 3-dimensional. Because you're able to see how other people will integrate with it, and that allows you to make it more perfectly what you wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
The more angles you see it from, the better you can polish it, right?
I think that was the point I was trying to make earlier too. It's like, I created this world for you guys. I spent so much time doing it, but when it came time to my own writing, it was just for me and trying to write down my creative stuff. And it wasn't like I was planning on publishing it or planning on doing anything. I didn't have anybody to personify besides myself, and that did not motivate me, you know?
Right. Me neither. I've tried that before too. And it doesn't help at all. And I don't like it. It's, if I don't have anybody like, when me and Gracie first started dating, I wrote so many songs. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was feeling a strong emotion. I had somebody to show it to.
Yeah. For
you know,
sure.
so it was like, I know once I'm done with it, no matter what it's about, it's like, well, Gracie's going to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had an audience that I knew was going to be receptive to it. I knew was going to be honest if it was terrible. And I knew, it was just good. And I feel like, you know, especially now, it's like, you know, dream and create for yourself. Those are the only like societal, like, go get 'em, tiger, you know, as we grow up. And I feel like that's a hollow call to action because it just doesn't work. I don't know, at least it doesn't for me. And it sounds like it didn't for you.
No.
So try to visualize the other. Try to create someone in your mind that it's like, I want them to see this when it's done, and follow through on that. Like with Austin Film Festival, like I've never even gotten to the second round, which is true of most people. But I've submitted so many scripts to that thing just because it gives me a deadline.
Yeah.
It gives me a deadline and I'm putting money towards the submission. And both of those things force me to take it seriously, even though it's, you know, quote unquote, for me.
Right.
So those are some other ways to maybe try personifying the other and creating for someone other than yourself.
I know one of the things that you just said was a deadline. And I think that is also... that could potentially help someone who's having that writer's block to just put something down. And if the deadline isn't in the next 15 minutes, but it's like, you know, a week away or a couple days away, you can just put something down, you know, pen to paper, revisit it after you're in a different state of mind or after you do a couple other things, you know, potentially go on a walk or, anything else. So what are some of if you're writing today, like say you're writing your book, and you're facing writer's block, what is the quick thing that you do to try and help yourself get over that writer's block?
Well, there's 2 things. One is I'll write about something else. So I like I said, we have an exponential creation podcast where basically I'm talking about how I take a mundane object and I build an entire story around it. So we had one about a pencil, started with a pencil because that was the thing next to me. And we ended up with some mad scientist. It was a fun episode. So anyway, that's what I like to do if I'm hitting a wall. So that character none of the characters I've ever made doing that end up in any of my fiction, but they're fun to write. So I'll take whatever object is around and I'll build a whole story around it, and I'll write one page, which is like 500 words. It's not a ton, but I try to capture the vibe of that character and where that character's at. And then I'll return to my story, because usually if you just get yourself rolling, that's enough to sort of uncork that part of your mind. But another way I've heard that said or heard that used is like human beings, part of our biological makeup, I guess, we hold on to and experience more viscerally pain and suffering. And so write what you hate for 500 words, like write whatever you're mad at. Delete it if it's somebody in your house, but write something that makes you mad. Like you were in traffic today, write about, how stupid the person in front of you was, whatever it happens to be. Take 500 words and make sure you hit that 500 words and then get back to work. That's what I do. I've also tried things like writing ridiculous dialogue for whatever the main character or whoever's in the scene. I'll just write something that they would never say. And it sort of like offends that reptilian part of your brain, the stuff you can't hear, subconscious. It upsets it so much that it comes back with the opposite. And I'd say that's the one I do the most often, because I'm a little bit vindictive with myself and I don't like to take breaks or rest. So I try to goad the subconscious part of my brain into action. And I do that by writing just insane stuff that would never happen in that scene. And I sort of wait for my brain to be like, yeah, they would never do that. They would do this. Like, aha, I got you. Here we go. Yeah. You sort of rope it and get it going again. So that's what I do. What do you do when you're experiencing writer's block?
I try to create a good vibe in the room that I'm going to be in. So I typically go to our guest room. I personally like to write in the dark or or lower light. So I think the other day ago, it was raining and it was very cloudy outside. So I actually turned off the overhead light, pulled the curtains aside, and just wrote in the dark with just the light of my tablet and my phone. And I was just brainstorming, just going. But like, I have to have a good vibe in the room. On top of that, I'll also throw in some music. There are so many playlists on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. I tend to go to YouTube for like ambient music or some lo-fi beats, or if I'm feeling something different. There's just so many different genres and playlists that'll go for anywhere between 1 to 8 hours, right? So I throw one of those on, noise canceling headphones, breathe, get myself probably coffee. Every now and then I'll grab a beer just to like maybe loosen up the tightness or that block, and take a break, and then I get back to it. And usually that works for me. Of course, when you're creating, most of my creative process is like creating the world, the D&D world, the homebrew world. So if I'm not creating something for the story that y'all are going on, then I'll just go to a different area of the world, or a different area, or I'll go and revisit some of my notes in the state that I'm in and see, okay, what can I build on, right? So I did write this, I wrote this, oh, I found this interesting, right? You tend to find your own work interesting. So I'll go through my work, oh, okay, let me expand on this. And then I'm like, oh, this isn't pertinent anymore. My brain space found what I needed. It flipped a switch, and now I'm ready to write the story or adventure you guys are on. So that's what I typically do. I get a good good vibe in the room, good music in the room, good drink in the room. So I don't have to leave, and I can usually vibe out for about 2 to 4 hours.
So you're a very, I'm sure a lot of people relate to that, a very experiential artist where it's like, I've got to be in the headspace, in the, like it's, I like to go to raves. So that's like, if I'm completely, blocked up, it's like, I like writing in a dark room. I like having music on, environmental sci-fi instrumental playlist on Spotify has been pretty good. It's just like tons of sci-fi movie soundtracks, and I love that. And if I can have like lasers or an electricity globe going, even better, but if I'm all sort of corked up and writer's blocked, I'll go to a rave, because that's about the happiest I get, other than just being with people I care about, but like just going to listen to digital music in like a super dark room, way louder than you ever should, with really bright lights shone in your eye. That's one of my happiest states. I really, really enjoy that.
Nice.
And that's sort of like, if I go to a rave with a question in my mind of like what I'm going to write next, it's like, okay, this is the scene. And I just try to say like, I'm going to be this character walking in, because I know I'm not going to talk to anybody. Right. Like, I'm going to be this character. This is them walking into whatever the next scene is. What happens next? I'll ask myself that as I get the ticket scanned, and then I'll go like stand up at the front where the lights are the brightest, and then just sort of like let myself get taken away by the music. And then after a while, it'll pop up in my head or on the drive home or something like that.
Nice.
But we were talking earlier, that's sort of like changing a location or changing states, which we were talking earlier about. And I thought you expressed it better than what's laid out in my mind right now. So you want to give a crack at that?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I was talking about was trying to fight writer's block in different states of mind. So like we kind of joked earlier about like, just do drugs and whatever. But that's not necessarily what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that there are different states of mind that you can be creative in, and that you just naturally are, right? So if you're communicating with a significant other, there are times when you have to say, hey, my tank is on E, or I'm this, or I'm that, right? You have to communicate your emotion. Same thing when you're writing, right? You're communicating with your work of art, whether again, writing, painting, podcasting, whatever. Sometimes you need to view it in a different lens. So maybe you were full of rest and you did your walk. Okay, take a different look at it, especially if you have a deadline, right? The course of the day, you experience so many different states of mind. Is when you wake up early in the morning, you're tired or you're not. You wake up and you're alert. You're one of those awesome people.
Blessed.
Yeah. Take a look at it then, right? Because you're viewing it in a different lens. You just woke up. Maybe you had a crazy dream and you're able to look at this now and put some dream logic into your work. Or there's, your post-food coma, right? Different state. You're probably a little bit more tired. You might look at it a different way. And then there's caffeinated, right? Like I said, I joked earlier, caffeine is a type of drug too. Alcohol is a type of drug. Marijuana is a type of drug. So like you could be on each one of those states and see what your art is going to do and what's going to come out of it. So if I've had a drink, I've heard many people say like a drink has helped them kind of take off the tension that they had in their creative process. So they were able to break that block and continue to go through it, and actually were very creative through it. Caffeine alters your state of mind a little bit too. So you could try that, being hydrated. If you're not taking care of your body, talking about diet, like we said earlier, if your diet isn't really great, you might have some mental fog. Exercising, like you said, going on a walk. Sometimes I'll be in the gym and I'll just be hitting pads and I'm like, oh, now that my nervous system is just taking over, I don't really have to think anymore. And now the thoughts that are coming in are the creative thoughts. I got to write these down. I got to remember these later. And so like those different states of mind have really helped me look back whenever I have writer's block so that I don't really experience that a whole lot anymore, because now I have my fight against it. I'm going to write something down. I'll come back later to it in a different headspace, because right now the headspace I'm in, I'm not going to be able to get much. So why am I going to beat myself up here? I can only give myself an hour on this piece of work. I'm going to rest, go do some things different. If I come back in a different headspace, I might be able to get another 4 hours out of it. And I've got something I'm actually proud of and looking forward to sharing, where instead, if I would have put in 3 hours, I wasted 2. If I was in a bad headspace trying to almost fight through that writer's block without taking a step back. So that's kind of what we were talking about, just those different states of mind. Of course, I've never experienced being high and trying to get my subject matter done. I know people do it, but that, I'll leave that up to the listener to make that decision. I do not.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Yeah. But it's another option that I've heard people do. It's a different state of mind, being around friends, family, talking about it in different areas, changing locations, and the location could just be a different room.
Yeah. Usually we'll go to the dining room table from my office if I get, if it's light, I don't know, you start to notice degrees where it's I'm too distracted in here maybe, so go to another room.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that's enough. But I find most recently, my writer's block comes down to one thing. When I experience it to some degree, it comes down to one thing, which is that my preparation was off. So, again, we're talking about thin mayonnaise. Beware of the thin mayonnaise, because
title of the episode.
Yeah. Thin mayonnaise today. Okay, so beware of it, because you're not going to have anything to say if you run out, right? So if the foundation, if you haven't gotten enough mayonnaise on the knife, you're not going to get to the end of the piece of bread. Mm-hmm. You're just not going to. And that's going to feel like writer's block, even if it, technically speaking, I guess, isn't.
Mm-hmm. Being unprepared.
Yeah. Yeah. You just don't have enough of a idea. So for the one I'm working on right now, there's an entire other character and his supporting cast that I haven't included or done any pre-work on, but I know that they have to exist. And I realized that right after the first paragraph. So I've got one paragraph of a story somewhere that is just totally undefined and unprogressed, because I still need to do that pre-work. And so I'm sort of leave myself hanging to some degree. And I haven't made time in my schedule. And that's another thing. If you don't schedule something to happen, it's not going to. Mm-hmm. Inspiration is such a flippant thing if you don't schedule it. A lot of people don't like that artist wise. It's I wait for inspiration to strike and then I go. And it's that works if it works for you, but I've never seen it work.
And that typically only works if you've put in prep, right? So I couldn't not prepare anything and the inspiration hit at the D&D table, and it's oh man, the inspiration is awesome, but the execution is going to be very poor, And so there's also a little bit of both. You can wait and let inspiration hit. Like I told you this morning, I was taking care of our dogs and a moment of inspiration hit for me just to add some more fluff to the story. But important fluff. I thought it was going to be something, you know, personifying the audience. I thought it was going to be something all you guys are going to enjoy. But my wife was talking to me and I completely zoned out at that. But because I've done the prep up to this point, I'm not just waiting on the inspiration. While you can do it, you should have some type of preparation, right? So if you're, you know,
like improv people, right? Like they have so many jokes and styles and things that they practice ahead of time. Like they practice to the point of like a rehearsal for a play, and then they get to where they can do improv. It's like they give themselves a very finite area to play around in, which allows them to be wildly creative in the moment because they've given themselves a defined box. So it's like you did the preparation prior to the campaign. So like, or prior to the session. So like when we sit down and we start playing, then almost all of what you're doing is improv, but you gave yourself the foundation to work on. So it's not like it's improv in front of a blank page. It's improv in front of an outline.
And some people's prep could be reading, right? So if you're trying to write a book or write a novel, where should your inspiration come from? Other books or novels or life, right? But to be able to really reach the maximum potential that you can get, you need to be intaking words and complex words, where if you're not reading, you're not going to be getting those complex words. Same thing with like an artist. You're practicing every day, right? That's what doodling is. You're going to doodle to practice. So when you do your final sketch or your final piece of art, that is, the inspiration might be, you know, something random, but you're still practicing. You're still trying to master your craft, and you're letting the inspiration draw you past the writer's block on a certain subject matter.
Yeah. So like I had a moment of inspiration. We did a one-shot campaign that was a Western.
Oh, so
I couldn't tell you now a single thing that happened in that one shot, but Michael keeps telling me that it was great.
It was awesome. It was one of the most fun little one shots. You felt like it was a Western, and we pressured him to do it because we had a friend over and we're like, hey, let's do D&D tonight. They're like, what do you got, Michael? I was like, nah, Henry. What does Henry got?
So on the spot, and I still have the note from it. I've got like 3 things written down. The note. Yeah. There was 3 words written down. And I think it was like a character name, a town name, and then like one other thing.
It was like direction or something. Like it wasn't even anything like real. It was like west or east.
Yeah. And that was it. That's all I had written down. And that was inspiration. Now, if I only created when I felt like that, that would be the only thing I ever did. I've had moments where I improv'd entirely, but it's like where it worked out perfectly. I mean, forget about it. You know, they say like, like professional athletes, right? Like they do things that are insane. Because they trust themselves enough. You know, they're in the box of their sport and they're able to improv there and make it look, you know, amazing. And they can do it over and over and over and over where they're improving, and it looks great. And because they win, we define it as perfect. But when it comes to art and our impression of our own art, and maybe that comes down to self-esteem a little bit, but if you're going to quantify it as like, this is the best it could have come out, which I think that one shot must have been, though I couldn't tell you a thing about it. I have only achieved that maybe once, maybe a handful of times. Let's be generous to myself. A handful of times. If that's the only times that I created, I mean, man, you wouldn't even call yourself an artist if you did art 5 times in your life.
Exactly.
So to generate your own creativity or your own enthusiasm for your art is just as important. It's like running reps in sports. You have to find ways to like schedule your creativity. So like the best time I've ever had in my life, right? I was running my photography company, and I had up to every 15 minutes in my day scheduled. And I would do 4 or 5 different kinds of art a day.
Yeah.
Including a podcast. And it was the best because I had an hour to do a podcast. I'd wake up, get my breakfast, and I had to be done at 9 a.m. I would start the podcast, had no idea what I was going to talk about. I just did it, and granted, if you look back and listen to him, that's the way it sounds, is like, well, this guy only put an hour into this crap, but it was so much fun because I would always have an idea, and I would always, within an order of magnitude, be able to get it to 30 minutes and do what I needed to do and move on to the next thing. It's like my brain adapted to it. And I got to the point where I was like, okay, I did my podcast. It's 9:45. Oh, it's almost 10. Like, I'm excited because I'm going to write now.
Yeah.
And I know I've got 2 hours to do it. And I can't wait for this next part I got to get to. And I'd be like, oh, it's noon. It's lunchtime. Great.
Yeah.
I can eat. And then I know at 1 o'clock I got, I don't think it was editing photos. Like, I know I got photos I got to work on. Like, this is great. I was excited my whole day. And I'm probably romanticizing it a little bit, but it was still one of the better times in my life because I had scheduled everything, and my clock, or whatever you want to say, was primed to say, okay, this is the next thing. Here we go. Creativity. This type. Here we go. I don't know. That worked really good for me.
Yeah. And I would say that might not be what works for everybody, but that worked for you, right? And so being creative and changing your creative endeavor constantly throughout the day, I'm sure it could be draining on people. That would be draining on me, but that could help you fight writer's block, right? Because then you're looking at creativity through a bunch of different lenses, like through photography, you're editing, you're doing something mechanical going through this, you're trying to, what the process is. For writing, it's very like, okay, what am I going to come up with? What am I going to write? This is kind of my outline. But your brain is already whirling from podcasting, of just talking. Now it's like, okay, I'm tired of talking. Now I can just write this out, or type it out, however you did it. So
yeah, exactly.
I think there's a lot of pros to that. But yeah,
you got to be wary of burnout with that, for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think I managed that for about 6 months. So, before life took over.
Yeah. Right.
So who can say whether that's something that would have burned me out or not? But along with exercise and eating well and drinking well, then it was like, I don't know, it was running pretty good. And I'd like to give it a shot. I'll let you know if I'm able to manage it again.
Yeah.
Whether I get burnt out. I'm sure I will eventually, but like I said, it was running good.
Then we can come back and do Writer's Block 2.
Yeah. Writer's Block 2, the 200 level Writer's Block class.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of good tips today on how to fight writer's block. A couple different things that you can do to try and adjust your headspace to get something down on the pen or paper.
Yeah, so definitely rest. Try to personify that audience. Get immediate feedback if you can, at least on some things. Maybe that'll help. But above all, do what works for you and that you can maintain. To creative thinkers all across the globe, thank you so much for joining us for another episode. Hopefully you're on Spotify so you can see these beautiful faces. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Peace.